about all new technology.
Did the blue lights on?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Speaker.
I'm gonna put that on my resume.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, we will
I don't really need a resume anymore.
bring our meeting to order. Feel free to get up and get seconds of anything as we go. So welcome. We have new faces tonight and more bodies, so that's nice. And I know you're all eating, but if we could kind of go around the room and just introduce ourselves, because we do have some new people here, that would be fabulous. So we have an idea of who all is able to be here tonight. So Tabitha, can you start with me?
I'm Tabitha. We have 4 students. We're in the Apple area. They're not currently in the Lakeland district though. My name's Jenny Feld and I have 2 kids. One's a middle schooler and the other one's a high schooler. I live here for them.
I'm Erin. I have a middle schooler and a elementary school at Garwood, and I've been in education for a long time and just want to continue in the education and help where I can.
Dick Holmes, Mayor, City of Rockland.
Hi, I'm Erica. I have a middle schooler and a high schooler. Lori Yarbrough. I have 2 elementary kids at Athol Elementary, and I'm the city clerk treasurer for the city of Athol.
Cody Huckins. I actually used to go to the Timberlake School District, graduated through there, and then I have a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old who, you know, I'm hoping to see bright things for in the future for schooling in the area. So.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks for being proactive.
Nate Putter just moved here a month ago. I have a son in grade 1 at Athol Elementary and 3 more following behind.
Jason Hendricks. I got a senior. One's already graduated. I went to Lakeland and I'm on the Lakeland Booster Club board.
Mark Worland, retired Lakeland teacher. 3 students went through Lakeland School District and graduated.
Joe Nunu, new resident, Radiant Lake, also VP of the association there. I have a son that lives in Post Falls, and I'm very new to the area, so there you go.
Jeanette Kramer, no kids, City Council of Athol.
Brian Wallace, I'm the Chief Financial Operations Officer for the district. Also have a recent graduate from Lakeland High and a sophomore at Lakeland High.
Dave Maxon from Athol. I've got twin boys over at Timberlake High School. Jason Bradbury. I teach 6th grade in middle school. Coach at the high school, and I had 2 kids grow up and graduate through Lakeland.
He's a Priest River graduate, but we don't have that anymore.
Took a step up when I came over to
I thought all the Bradburys were in Rafter.
There are. Yeah, there's a bunch up there too.
Huh?
We're all.
I'm Lynn Casley. I'm the assistant superintendent, and I have 2 graduates from Timberlake, and I have a senior in high school at Timberlake High School. So.
I'm Rebecca, district office, and I have a daughter over at Lakeland Middle School, 8th grade.
Anita Duke's a community member.
Very active. She comes to a lot of our board meetings.
Mary Thomas, I'm currently the ALP teacher, grade keeper, former graduate of Lakeland High School, and I graduated in 2 sons.
I'm Sandy Staff Cutter, and between teaching and volunteering, I spent 40 years at John Brown Elementary.
Yeah.
Teresa Bailey. I'm a fairly new resident to Grafton. I'm a retired teacher from the Kellogg School District. I have no grandchildren in this district, but I live in Brookshire and there's a lot of kids there, and I know how important schools and things are for kids. So that's why I'm here.
I'm Randy Bain. I'm a school board trustee. Daughter is a recent graduate from Timberlake.
She's awesome.
Yeah.
We love her. Aren't you married to a graduate?
I am married to a Lakeland graduate. Yep.
Forgot about
I don't claim him. I only claim her.
Say it again.
We are recording.
I don't think so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he can
Could
hop
be.
on and-
So, to those of you, this is our third meeting, so for some of you, this is your first opportunity to come to these meetings. And so the first meeting, we just shared a lot of information. At the last meeting, might be worthwhile pulling up. Let's see here.
My head in the way.
One of the things that might be helpful for those of you who are new, especially if you're new to public education in Idaho. Teresa will know this well because she was in Idaho as a teacher. The state of Idaho funds about 75% of what we do in this district. And so this sheet breaks down for you some of where the gap is, so that you can see why the need for the supplemental levy is there. And so Brian worked on this for us. So we get, for all of our certified staff, almost $13 million, up to $1 million of discretionary money, but we spend $15 million, and so this is the gap that the supplemental levy fills for us. And to get this 19, we just divided this kind of by the median income of our average of what our teachers make. If we were just hiring brand new teachers, this number would be a little bit larger. If we were just hiring veteran teachers, it would be a little bit smaller. Classified staff, we get $2 million, $1.2 million in discretionary, but we spend $5.7 million, so you can see there's a pretty large gap. And unfortunately, our classified staff doesn't get paid nearly what they're worth. But this $2 million, it's 99 people that we currently employ. And the reason that this is important to us is because of our proximity to Spokane. So in Washington, they pay a lot more money than Idaho does. They fund schools differently in Washington, and so we have people who live in our community who commute to Washington to make that $30,000 a year more than what they would make if they were here. So we pay more than what the state funding source gives us, just to try to be kind of competitive with our neighboring state to keep our really good teachers in our district. So this was part of what we went over last meeting. For those of you who are new, but you can see all of the areas, mandatory benefits. The state is fully funding the medical, so there isn't a gap there for us. The state pays nothing for extracurricular athletics and activities, so that is coaches, it's travel, it's uniforms, it's whatever it takes for the different clubs and sporting groups. About $700,000 gap for transportation. The state gives us $53,000 for school safety in our district. We employ 4 armed safety specialists and 3 SROs. Our goal is to have 1 at every school, so we've got 4 more at some point to hire. But
Are those SROs split between the city, and is that
we pay 65% of their salaries and benefits because they're ours for almost 10 months. And then you can see instructional materials, utilities, and then technology. So that's the gap, 9.3. So for those of you this is your first meeting, we have 3 primary tasks this year. The first one being we need to make a recommendation to our school board about what we want to do with our supplemental levy. And the timeline is down here at the bottom. Ideally, we would have our recommendation to the board by November so that they could have discussion in November. We would be there to answer questions if they had any of us. And then it would be on the December agenda for approval. And then in January, the approval of the ballot language the board has to approve it, and it has to be to the county by the end of January for the March date. So that's our first focus. In addition to the supplemental levy, we have a plant facility levy that expired last year. The state gives very little money to schools for the maintenance of buildings. We get lottery dollars, so that fluctuates depending on how big the Powerball and Mega Millions gets and how many people buy tickets. So this year we got more money from the lottery than we have gotten in years past. I think we were around $400,000 this year, and typically it's between $300 and $350. That pays for a roof, and that's it. So if we want to have any kind of preventative maintenance program for our 11 schools and our facilities and our bus and our child nutrition, it has to be more than just the lottery. And so for as long as I've been in the district, we have always had a plant facility levy. And that one expired last year, so we are getting no monies from that this year. So we have to decide as a team what we want to recommend to the board with regard to that. And then once we move past the levies and the board makes their decisions about what they want to do, then our big focus is just long-range planning and looking at growth and areas of need. Some of our buildings are in better shape than others, and so what do we want our 10-year plan to look like for the district? So that's kind of the scope of our work. At our last meeting, we talked a lot about supplemental levy. Brian shared some numbers, and he's here tonight, so he'll do a much better job of explaining it than I did last time. With regard to what happens to our levy rate if we were to run a supplemental levy at what we currently have, what would happen if we increased it, what would happen if we decreased it. So he can speak to that. And so what we did, the way we ended last week, and where I'd like to start this week, I keep saying last week, it was 2 weeks ago. Everybody was sitting at tables just like this, 3 tables. So at the tables, I asked each group to just kind of talk and brainstorm. What would your recommendation be? And out of the 3 tables, we had 3 completely different recommendations. So one of our tables said, just run the supplemental levy and let's wait and we'll do something different for the plant facility at a later date. We don't want to confuse the voters. Another table said, let's take what we need for plant facility and add it to the supplemental and just run one levy, and then Brian would know what that amount is that we're putting in there for plant maintenance, facility maintenance. And then we're just running one levy, and we're not confusing people. And the third table said, let's just run them, figure out what we need for both, run them side by side, and let the patrons decide what they want to do with that. So those were the 3 recommendations that came last time. And so tonight I just want to kind of funnel down to what do we think our best recommendation to the board would be. There's a piece of information that I didn't share last time. It just didn't dawn on me to share it. So that's the first thing I want to talk about here. There is language in Idaho code that says when a community's run and passed a supplemental levy for, I think it's 7. Open it. I believe it's 7 times. Yep, 7 consecutive years. Been authorized through an election held to certify a supplemental levy. The community could vote to just make it a permanent levy, and then we don't have to go back out to the community every 2 years. It just becomes part of the funding. There are pros and cons to that.
And it is also just that the levy had to be at least 20% or more of your operating budget. So it couldn't just been a small levy. And our levy has been at that level for more than 7 years.
So that's something that we probably just need to discuss and get some input from the community members who are here. with regard to whether that's a good idea, bad idea, something that would be palatable.
What? Oh yeah, that'd be great, thanks.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sweating.
So like could you give me, like in the last 5 years, what are the history of levies? Have they passed or not?
Lakeland has, so I will give you a quick overview.
Okay.
Lakeland has historically enjoyed a lot of support from our community. In, I think it was 2018, we pulled together a group much like this to talk about overcrowding in schools. And the decision was made from this group after a lot of information was given. They toured all of our schools. The recommendation that went to the board was that we were going to run a $70 million bond for a new high school, and then we could move Lakeland Middle School kids into the existing high school, because Lakeland Middle School is probably one of our most expensive buildings to run because it's so old and it needs so much renovation. And the board approved that, but the decision was made to kind of run that under the radar, which we've never done in this district. We've always been really open and honest about what we're trying to accomplish with the community. And because we had been that way, they were very supportive of us. But I feel like we lost some credibility with our patrons, and I feel like we lost some trust because people were hearing about it kind of through the grapevine, but they weren't getting any information from the school district. So when we ran our last supplemental levy 2 years ago, we only passed it by 42 votes. And so we have work to do.
Yeah.
Lynn and I have been meeting with different groups. We are meeting with church leaders and then talking to their groups. I did a podcast with Apple Baptist, which Nate heard when he was in Arizona.
Yep.
So that was awesome to hear that people that far
Touching
away,
people, yep.
yeah, we're hearing
That's
it. And he said it was good, so that's good. That's even better. And we went to Golden Spike Estates annual meeting on the 17th and spoke to their group. We're going tomorrow night to the board meeting for Radiant Lakes HOA. So what we're trying to do is to connect a little bit more intimately with groups of people throughout the district. Just kind of letting them know who we are, what we stand for, and what the levy's about, because people have questions about it. But this, like yourself, we have a lot of, 67% of the people who live here don't have any ties to our schools. So when you're sending home information through the schools, it's really hard for them it's hard for us to get information to people like you who don't have grandkids or kids in the schools. So we sent home a flyer in August, and we'll send another one home in October, at the end of October, and then and it's a mailer that goes to every household. We did ask about that, and so I have some information because Mary didn't get one.
That's how I found out about this.
Oh, perfect. Was it on the flyer?
Mm-hmm.
So, so that was a long answer to your question.
Okay.
So I think we have work to do.
Okay.
But I am finding that as we're talking to people, that they're appreciative of the information we're giving and open to the idea of this. I wish we weren't doing it now. It's the worst possible economic climate for a levy, but it is what it is.
For some of the new people, I think the two things that really stood out to me last time you might want to talk about, which is why there's the supplemental. We have more control over what items in the school district, and then the length of the two different levies.
Oh, thank you. So in 2006, prior to 2006, in Idaho, schools were funded through property taxes. So everybody paid $4.58 or something.
$2.50 per thousand. was flat.
$2.50 per thousand. And that money just went to the schools. Well, then in 2006, the governor at the time went to become the Secretary of the Interior, I think, and so Lieutenant Governor Risch stepped in for 3 or 4 months. And he made the decision while he was governor that he was going to change the funding mechanism for schools, and he moved it from property taxes to sales tax. And the intent was to give local school districts a little bit more control over what was going on in their school. So if you want more than what the state is providing, then you get to choose to do that, and you do it through a supplemental levy.
Well, and
So-
I'll add to that,
Okay.
is that they changed that law because that was just before the Great Recession, and as we've had the huge spike in property taxes in 2006, or now, the same thing happened in 2006, where values are going up, and so they're concerned about that impact on the local. So when they changed the law, they replaced that funding with sales and income tax. And the intent was to keep the same level of funding at the state level. But then the Great Recession hit. When the Great Recession hit and income taxes and sales tax revenues were down, they cut school funding. And so then school districts started passing supplemental levies at a higher rate to make up that gap. And back in 2006, we still had supplemental levy. The same law was on the books. We could have done it, but the funding was more stable. So literally, if you think in 2006, one of the numbers you get is discretionary funding. At that time, 2006, we were getting $26,000 a unit. I won't get what a unit is, but just think $26,000. That went down to $19,000 per unit. That's a significant reduction. It took them all the way to just about 3 years ago to get back to where we were in 2006.
Just before COVID.
Just before COVID. We finally came back to that funding level. So the supplemental levies really filled the gap because we got cut at the state level. That's what happened. And that property tax isn't going to come back as far as that stable funding source. But I guess that's a history of why most districts now in Idaho have supplemental levies.
But the supplemental levies do allow our board and our communities to kind of decide what we want our district to look like and how we want to structure it. So in this district, it's been important the entire 32 years that I've been here that we have small neighborhood schools and not large super schools. So you can go to Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls and they've got elementary schools that have 700 and 800 kids in them. Lakeland has opted not to do that. It costs more money to run small neighborhood schools because you just have more staff to do that. So our supplemental levy allows our community to make some of those decisions. We don't get any very little money from the state for curriculum, and up until 6 years ago, Lakeland was really good about adopting a new textbook every year to follow the adoption cycle of the state. And then because of the recession, the superintendent at that time inherited a negative fund balance, and so we kind of pushed pause and didn't do any big expenditures. So we have some work to do to kind of catch up now, and an adoption is $1 million to buy a new English program or a new math program. And so if we want to stay, if the board and the community wants to have control over what's being used in the classroom, the supplemental levy allows us to do that. So, yes ma'am.
Do we know what we're getting yet from the state, from the special session?
Won't be till next year.
Yeah,
They didn't appropriate it.
Yep,
So they approved it, but they didn't appropriate it because
votes.
everyone's getting reelected, so they went ahead, okay.
There's no appropriation till next year with the new Congress.
Okay, thank you, that's what I was wondering.
And that'll go in effect July 1st, so
Do
it'll
you
be
even
for
know
the
what that's
next
going
year.
to?
Yeah.
And did you not say supplemental is 2 years, plant is 10?
Plant can be up to 10.
Up to 10.
Yep, so the supplemental by law can only be run for 2 years at a time. Plant facility can be up to 10 years. And the plant facility can only be used for capital projects, furniture, equipment, those kinds of things. We can't use any of that money for salaries and personnel. So we could, one of our brainstorms was our plant facility levy was $1.146 million every year for 5 years. That was the one that just expired. So if we added that to our supplemental levy and made it a little bit bigger to pull that out later, you can do that, you can use supplemental levy dollars for a facility, but you can't do the reverse, and we wouldn't want to anyway. It works better the other direction.
Yeah, I think our table was one of the ones that wanted to do a combination, didn't we? I think so, and yeah, my worry about running the plant facility levy along with the other one is, you've got the people that think, well, I'll just vote for this one, it's a little less, I'll help them out there, and I think that may hurt this one a little bit.
The supplemental.
Or not vote for either one, because they're hitting
Right,
two at one time.
Right, so if everybody feels like they're kind of up to speed, what my plan is for tonight is, what I thought we would do is, over on that whiteboard we can put brainstorm A, which was just a supplemental, and then brainstorm B, which was combine the two, make it just a supplemental but increase it to add the plant facility to it. And then over here we can have brainstorm C, which was run them side by side. And what I would like us to do is, I think by table, we'll assign tables, is to write pros and cons for that particular brainstorm that you're assigned to, and then we'll kind of move around the room and you'll have an opportunity to add to what the other teams wrote, so that we can start to digest this and figure out which direction
Do
we
you
want to
wanna do 1, 2, 3, and then have this one be the discussion about the permanent, if that's an option, if somebody wanted the permanent, and have that be up there for the discussion?
Yeah, we can do that.
Can we
So I
talk
was gonna-
a little bit more about the permanent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How that works?
Is that what you were gonna ask?
I was gonna ask, yeah, the pros and cons of that prior to if that has an effect on these others.
So basically, the law says that we can do it. It's hard to say, there are lots of pros and cons. I mean, the pro is, selfishly, is we don't have to go out and ask patrons for money every 2 years, it's just built in. But it might be a big ask right now because
The economy.
everything costs more and people are looking at how much they're spending in gas
And
and
they're
food, and so this may not be the right year to do it. And then the other part of that is, if that's what we do, then I would, as a superintendent, would not be comfortable going out again later and asking for more than what is permanent. So we have to figure out how to live within that box, which isn't a bad thing. I think we need to start figuring out how to do that anyway, but last week, or 2 weeks ago, Mayor Holmes, Vic, pointed out that if we ask for the same amount of money in the supplemental levy, which is $9.52 million, those dollars are not the same. They're not going to get us the same as what we got 2 years ago because the inflation is so high. And so he suggested we need to take into account inflation and maybe ask for a little bit more, which makes me nervous because, again, people are really looking at how much they're spending. But so this team just has to really kind of digest what those are just a few things off the top of my head that I think about. But as community members, you may have different points of view, and so it'll be a really good conversation. And I haven't even broached this subject with the board, so I have no idea what they're thinking about it.
Wasn't one of the bonds in like a year or two it drops off, so that's gonna affect the levy rate?
Well,
It's gonna lower in 2 years.
I think we currently have
2024.
2024.
Do we have 2 bonds on the books? One will drop off before that, and then the other one?
Yeah, one will drop off, but the way that we're structuring the payments is the last 3 years of the bond, we're collecting the same amount, about $935,000-$40,000. So we did that last year. We're collecting that for this year. That we're just authorizing that's coming through for the new tax year. It's tax year's calendar year, not school year. And then we'll have 1 more year of that, and then it drops off.
Right, which was, I think as part of the FAR table, was our logic for not running or not changing anything on the supplemental levy, so that in 2 years, then maybe you continue look at doing a longer or permanent or increasing it or something, not knowing where the economy was and the rates. Other levies would drop off
a little bit.
And a lot of times school districts do look at if one drop bonds off and mean, last time we passed it, that's over 20 years ago.
Right.
So a lot of times districts are looking, that's 20 years of maybe not doing significant projects of growth, is that you replace it with a bond or something capital to meet some of those building needs.
And I think that the public looks at their property tax bill and they see 5 different things from the school district and 5 different things from the fire department, and then they get overwhelmed. But if they see one from each, it's like, okay, just rather the dollar amount is the same or different, I think it's overwhelming to see all the different ones, you know.
Yeah, there's one that will always be there, that's our tort levy, that's a requirement that we have, and it's a tiny one. But, yeah, so we have to work through, those are the things we've gotta work through, because this is a kind of a representation of our different communities that we support, and, we just have to figure out what's the best way to move forward, recognizing that there's about a 25% gap between what we get from the state in the general fund and what we actually pay out, our expenditures to run our programs. So, any other questions before we kind of roll up our sleeves?
Lisa, did you give us a number on maintenance that would be the basic amount?
For the plant facility?
For plant facility.
It's like 1 point, what was
Brian?
it? 1.4.
It was 1.146.
6 is what we had for the last 5 years. So that is dropping off for this school year.
Yeah.
So, you know, so literally compared this year to last year as far as taxes, we're collecting $1 million less, or 1.1 less than we did this past year. So when the tax rates and the amounts that are collected will reflect that when you get those, you know, notices from the county on tax rates, which happens in sort of December.
I think Mary's asking if we're going to talk about the plant facility levy, is that the right amount
To do what
needs to be done?
the necessity.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, that's I guess we could argue a lot of ways, but yes, I think we've been using that money. I mean, it's not enough to do like build a building.
No.
And it's really not enough to do really major renovation. So that if you're really gonna say, okay, we wanna bring up, you know, if we're gonna build a building today, it's gonna look a lot different than what Athol Elementary and Lakeland Middle School look like right now. Because those are built in the mid-60s and haven't had really significant money put into them. So if we're saying the standard is a new building, to bring up an older building to sort of newer standards with upgraded plumbing, HVAC, electrical, and all those things, it's almost the cost of a building. Per square foot, it is, whether you replace it or modernize it. So what the $1.1 million allowed us to do was sort of aggressive and deferred maintenance, I'd call it. We had some leaky roofs. We were able to place roofs. We were able to, you know, if a big, you know, boiler went down at one of the buildings. In fact, it happened at Lakeland High School. It's happened up in Timberlake and Timberlake High. You know, we were able to, you know, pay the $80,000 to replace that boiler. So it's sort of like you're keeping things going, but to really do super major stuff, it doesn't allow us. But I mean, certainly those dollars were, you know, critical as we had, you know, active leaks in many of our buildings, and now we've really caught up. We just replaced Betty Kiefer's roof this summer. And you know, that roof wasn't leaking yet, but it's original to the construction in the 90s. So it was time. And so it was nice actually to be able to do a project before the leak. You know, be a little proactive, right. And so those are things that we could start catching up with those dollars not available, you know, long term. That is a concern for sure. We're going to be able to bridge the gap here for a couple years right now through, you know, some, you know, the finances for the district are really healthy right now. So that's good. But, you know, 10 years down the road, it may be a different story.
So, but with the economy the way it is now and people not wanting to, if people are living paycheck to paycheck, and let's pretend the school district is that, right? You've got money to do what's absolutely necessary to keep the buildings going. Let's say the economy looks really bad for the next year or two, and then we put something on after a couple of years. I mean, I don't know that it will look much better in 2 years, but you just don't know. It's a hard one.
That's always the hard decisions you make,
Yeah.
and generally, this is just, if you look historical, I've worked, several districts. I worked in Washington, and they had a similar system of levies. And as a general rule across, either a big urban district or a district more like us, or smaller ones, that if you're asking for a new levy, a new bond, that's more difficult to pass than if you're asking for something that had already been there and you're just asking to replace it and keep it going.
So is that what it would be?
Well,
Put it on that.
We can't. No, it's dropping. We had 1.1 and it's dropping off. So if we went back in a year time, we have had a year gap. You're sort of asking for new. But it's only been a year. So often, like I've known, Coeur d'Alene School District did this several years ago. They had a plant levy. They had quite a bit of growth and needed new buildings, so they dropped the plant levy off and they passed a bond. The bond sort of replaced the levy, so it was sort of that replacement. It wasn't really an add, and and they were able to, build some new buildings. But so those are the things I think that all organizations sometimes look at. There's pros and cons of all the approaches, and I think that I like the quote from, we work with, when we do get bonds, you work, it gets sort of complicated with municipal finance and all that, and you work with some experts, and a guy named Eric Herringer, who really bright, he's worked for the district for years, and when he talks with boards or to, administrators, and he says, they always ask me, well, what's the right levy amount? And he goes, what your community will support. He said, because there's a level of what the community is willing to support and what they can do, and definitely our board, sort of they really are weighing that factor of the needs of the program and of the district, and trying to make sure we have the resources we need, and also the ability and where the community is. And it's not an easy. There's no easy answer, and wasn't easy 20 years ago, and it's not easy now. Yeah.
Never going to be. And it's hard to know the minds of people today, and a lot of people don't show up to vote, and a lot of people, so it causes a lot of issues. But it's like if you put them separately, are two requests going to scare them off, and they say forget it, nothing, or if you put too big of a dollar amount, is that going to scare them off? It's like, and if you really, really need the supplemental one, then, but it's hard to know the psyche of people voting.
I have a question. So on the permanent one that you guys have kind of presented here, would that be like a rate, or would it be a set dollar amount, or would that be for us to decide?
It's not a rate, it's an amount. And so, for example, Sandpoint or Lake Pend Oreille School District and Moscow both have permanent levies. Moscow's been there for years. Lake Pend Oreille's recent history within the last two or 3 years. So it's the amount that let's say we kept the same amount, the 9.52. That amount then becomes permanent. And then I know Moscow, since they've had it for so many years, and obviously the dollars, when they passed it back, I don't know, it might even been back in the 80s. They don't equal $80. So they have run measures in the future. And how some of that dynamics work, I'm not exactly sure. But it is the dollar amount, so the rate isn't going to be static. It's going to depend on where property values are. And as a general rule, the rate will go down over time, but there could be years where the rate could go up if property values.
You're
went
saying
down.
the tax rate will go down?
As a general rule, yes,
As
if you have a
percent
flat
of property
amount.
value?
Because property values are going, as property values rise, rates go down.
Sure.
That's,
So no matter how many people move into the district and how much assessed value we have as a district,
If we said we wanted
only-
9.5 million,
that's all we're getting.
that would be all we got every year for as long as
For forever.
And you
for
have to
forever.
write it like that? You can't peg it to inflation or student count or anything?
No, because if it's permanent, it's
It's a set.
So it doesn't take into account new houses and new community members.
So you end up having to
no,
run a
and just
supplemental
just
levy
like our
anyway
current
to
supplemental
supplement
does
the
not.
permanent.
yeah, so the more people
Yeah.
who come in, the smaller your piece of the pie becomes.
So do
we
we-
pay less, but we still collect the same
Right,
amount of money.
so do we have, I mean, I've seen lots of projections that like Rathdrum's gonna like double in the next 10 years or, correct? No?
No, double, the last projection is 2045, a little slightly more than double. So
Okay,
it's
so we're
20
20
years out.
years out.
When you're little, you double pretty easy.
Mm-hmm.
As you get bigger, it's really hard to double, like New York City, it
Right.
would be a major thing for them to double.
Yeah.
But so as the city grows, the percentage goes down.
Well, and something that was shared last time we met was that this year we had less new students than the prior year, even with all the growth, because a lot of the people moving in either A, don't have children age range, or, and did you say there's more that are homeschooling?
No, what we saw was we had lots of people who had to move out of our area because they couldn't afford rent here, and we had almost an equal number of people with kids moving in. So although when I looked at our enrollment, we're actually up
A little bit.
a little bit.
This year's sort of flat from the previous year. We've been on a trajectory last 5-6 years. COVID, the one COVID year, of course, was weird, but about 1.5–2% has sort of been our trend line over the past 5-6 years. So we might have a little bit of dip in that trend line, but next year it might, So you can figure in a 1% of 1.5% kids.
We're at 47, I think 66. Is
Can
right.
I,
So we were 4711, so that's 50 kids.
can I add something, just, it may not be applicable, but I just want to throw this out. I was visiting my son, who's a teacher in Las Vegas School District. I was on the flight back, I sat next to a gentleman that all he did was remodel. And he remodels homes in Las Vegas, and he's remodeling homes in Sandpoint. And to get that kind of insight from a remodeler, I'm not talking about a home builder, but to get that insight from the conversation I had with him on the plane, he was like almost rock solid that people are going to be moving into that area without skipping a beat.
People are moving in, they're just not moving in with little kids.
Right,
Because they can't.
because
afford it.
it's more retired people that can afford to live here, or people.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of
Older
younger
kids.
people choosing not to have children, too. I think there's more.
Yeah, but it was a short conversation with him on the plane because we're now, it's not, and I got the feeling that it's not just retirees moving over that part of the state. I think there's a lot of people with families from other states moving there.
Right, and I would say that definitely happened because we have, it was almost, it was at one point, the first Thursday of school, we had exactly the same number of kids in our classrooms as we had on the last day of school last year. So, and we know we lost 25% of our kids who moved away.
Yet-
So we gained 25, it was an even gain, it wasn't, we didn't get more. But we have some higher numbers at our primary, but Lakeland High School is 100 kids higher than they've been. So I think families are coming with, they're just a little more established and they can afford the homes here more easily. We had probably 5 to 7 teachers that we hired. They signed a contract, well, they maybe didn't quite get to the contract signing, and then had to rescind their,
Acceptance.
their
Acceptance.
acceptance, thank you, of the contract because they couldn't find a place to live. They could not afford to live here, so, that is a real issue for us. Which actually right now I'm okay with because it will allow us to be more intentional in our thinking as we move beyond the supplemental levy into long range. Where we were concerned, the board was concerned that we were gonna need to rush to a bond to take care of classrooms and class sizes to make sure we have adequate space for kids. And this is helping us a little bit not have to feel quite so rushed.
Have you ever run in the same year a supplemental and a plat fund?
We've done it twice. The first time we did it, the people who voted didn't understand why there were 2 measures on the ballot, and a lot of people looked at it, to their credit, they thought they had to pick one, and so they chose the one that was the most money for the district, so the supplemental levy passed, but the plant facility levy failed, because they didn't realize that they could vote yes for both. So once we explained that and the district reran the plant facility levy, it passed at a high rate of passage. And then in 2017, it just happened that the supplemental and the plant facility ended on the same year, and we had to rerun them, and they both ran side by side, and they both passed with over 70% passage rate.
Okay.
So it can be done.
So the first time though, the plant fund didn't go, but you were able to get it passed later in the year.
We ran it initially in, it was either March or May. We reran it, I think in August. It passed, but.
For a smaller amount, right? It had to be
It was a little bit smaller amount, and I think they went from 10 years to 5.
To 5,
yeah.
And there's, you know, in Idaho, there's statistics where they look at districts that run 2 measures at the same time, or one, is there a difference in the passage rate, and there really isn't. It just sort of depends, and every community might be a little bit different, and the circumstances different, but you know, often when a bond goes at the same time as a supplemental levy, that the passage and the fail rates are actually fairly similar.
But
Doesn't mean that may not be our case, but you know,
Sure.
anyway.
It can be done, and it just takes a lot of education. Right.
Have you ever ran them both combined like we're talking about here as a supplemental? Are we aware of where anywhere else in the state that's happened?
Yeah, well, Coeur d'Alene's run, you know, a supplemental levy can be, it's typically for operations, but they ran, when they made a lot of their security upgrades, where they did all the access control to buildings, fencing around campuses, security cameras, and it's pretty significant because, you know, there are over 20 buildings. That wasn't a plant levy, that was a 2-year supplemental, and they had another supplemental at the same time, so they had 2 supplementals going. So that, there's nothing that precludes us from some of those things, but still it was only 2 years. And it was, you know, obviously the ballot language of that was very specific to what they were going to use the dollars for. It wasn't, whereas general operations, it was specific to the security.
If you combine them like that, can you only do the plant for the 2 years?
If you combine them, then you're not running a plant facility levy, you're running a supplemental levy, and you're just making the decision that.
To make it enough to go to the plant, to the maintenance, okay.
Sandy?
Well, I heard you end a sentence with education a minute ago, and I think whatever this group comes up with, educating our patrons, and we need to support whatever we come up with so that we're out there educating them and letting them know. So I think we're gonna come up with some plan, but I think educating people is going to be the success of whatever plan we come up with.
Absolutely. Because as we're talking to people, we've talked to people who openly told us that they are not supportive of school levies because they've opted not to have kids in schools. And then through the conversation and a little bit of understanding, they, at the end of the conversation, they let us know that they will support us and that they will let other people know that they're supporting us. So but it's got to be in those small, intimate kind of settings where you're actually having meaningful conversation with people. In the past, we've just done like a couple of town hall meetings where the superintendent had a presentation and people came and she went through the slides and there were some questions, but it was really more talking at people instead of talking with people, and we're finding a lot more success talking with people. So that will be, we will talk to anybody who will let us.
Well, you know, Golden Spike is a good representation of senior citizens. How did that go?
I got a big applause from them, and they were super positive and very appreciative of the time.
Very good.
So we had
I think just reassuring the community that, you know, a lot of us, a significant amount of our staff, I mean, we are community members as well. Most of us have kids in this district, so we all really want the same thing. And so just, you know, connecting with them on that level and then allowing that transparency and openness to have, you know, to ask questions that maybe they wouldn't publicly be willing to ask. And so it's just been a sit like this and just, you know, ask us what you want to ask and we'll share what we do, what our process, what our system is. So I feel like people have felt really, it's been warm and inviting and they feel welcome to ask, and we can just share what we're doing because we, again, all want the same thing. We're all on the same team.
Yeah, I think we have the kind of the challenge, and I love challenges, to educate people about why we're asking for a supplemental levy. You know, people are saying things like, are they asking the question, are they mismanaging their money? Why do they need money? And so that's the education part. We just have to help them understand that. But the other part of the trust building that I think has to happen, and Lynn, this is what Lynn and I have really been focusing on, is when people are sitting at home in our community and they're watching the news and they're seeing things that are happening in California and Oregon and Washington, and they're hearing about, you know, in Washington, for kindergarten, first and second grade teachers are required by law to talk to their kids about the ability to choose what gender you want to be. And in this community, that is not who we are, and it is not what our parents want. And so we have had to kind of reiterate to a lot of different groups that we serve a really conservative community, and our schools need to reflect those conservative values. And I think our board has done a really good job of dealing with some of those hot topics, like critical race theory. You know, that's illegal in the state of Idaho for teachers to teach critical race theory in classrooms. But our board went one step further and wrote a resolution so that they could ensure that our patrons knew that they were taking that very seriously and it wasn't going to happen. So as we're talking to people, that's resonating with them. Like they don't know if they can trust the schools because they don't know what we're doing in our classrooms. And especially people who don't have kids in our schools. So those are the conversations that we've been having, and they've gone really well. Yes, sir.
One of the things that I've heard from, I've got, you know, friends that live in Golden Spike, for example, and their whole thing is, well, damn it, why can't the school, you know, function on a budget? I've got my checking account, I've got my budget, how come you can't? And if we can find a way, no matter what we come up with here, to explain, you know, the budget and the process, and we are working within a budget, that would go tremendously to help sway a lot of people as well.
Yeah, at our last meeting, I think some people thought that that first document that I brought up that showed the gaps between what we get from the state, this one, and what we actually spend might be helpful to put into one of our flyers out to our community so they can kind of get a better picture of what that looks like, just to try to provide some of that education.
Do we know what the mindset of most of the folks are in our communities as to, the easiest way to sell it to the general public here to vote upon? And that's what we're, as far as the brainstorming, is it, what is the most beneficial, over your experience over the last 32 years here, what have you seen as the best way to present this? Do we bundle it, or we just go with the supplemental and ask for one lump sum?
In
your opinion.
You're asking my opinion. I would
asking
tell
you.
you, because we are working so hard at trying to be really open and transparent with our patrons, that putting the plant facility levy in the supplemental levy feels a little bit not transparent to me.
Okay.
I would rather, personally, if we decide that we're gonna run it, I'd rather run them side by side and let our patrons decide what they feel like they can support. And I understand where the brainstorm came from, but that's just my personal opinion. And I'm only one member on this team. But I do want to keep that transparency kind of at the forefront, because we got beat up pretty badly after that failed bond, and we're still kind of climbing that hill a little bit and rebuilding trust and credibility. And so whatever we do, I want to make sure that we're being crystal clear with people about what they're voting on.
I feel like that bond too was a very large amount, and I don't know if our community had ever seen anything quite that large.
What was it for? How much? Do you remember? how much?
70 million.
Our mantra was go big or go home.
Oh my
And
gosh,
they just
70
kept
million?
adding things to it.
It was how much?
Well,
70 million.
70 million.
But that's what it takes to build a new high school.
It was-
Sure. But I don't think that people, I think we would have done a lot better if we hadn't presented it that way.
Yeah,
think
I
we
agree.
would, yeah.
And we
Wow.
also
70.
we also didn't present it that's the biggest thing, is we didn't go out to the public and say, hey everybody, here's what we're doing, feel free to ask us questions, this is why because there was a lot of work that team did and that they put into that recommendation, and lots of conversation, and they did it trying to be forward thinking, recognizing that we are going to continue to grow, and at some point we are going to need to have the high school, and a high school was never going to be cheaper to build than it was in 2018. The prices just keep going up.
Yeah.
And so they were thinking that we can kind of take care of all of these things if we do that, and we have the land out there to do it.
And just so, I don't want to rehash that whole there, but the group, I stood before the group, and I actually said, in the mid-2000s, the Coeur d'Alene School District came out with a $50 million bond. And my dad, who had, we've been in the area, I'm a native, he's always supported schools, said to me, and I wasn't working for Coeur d'Alene or anything, he says, well, that's just too much. And I go, well, how do you know it's too much, Dad? He says, well, it's 50 million, it's too much. So what that showed me is, there's a sticker shock, there's a price that people look at. So when we had our conversations, we had a lot of hard conversations in 2018. I brought that story up to the group, saying, guys, this may be a sticker shock for our community because it's big. The bond was going to pay for renovating some of the elementary schools, doing additional work up at Timberlake High School a little bit, also adding some capacity at Timberlake Middle School where we just put a portable in, and then it was going to put the high school as the biggest dollar, and also moving Mountain View, getting them out of that building. So it wasn't just the high school. And it was a big ask. And so, it wasn't like the group was in a bubble not knowing that that was going to be a challenge, and it was a big ask. And so I guess that's where we're at. In the back of my mind, I went, I grew up here. I was thinking, boy, I'm thinking of my dad, right? It just may not go. But Lewiston High School had just recently been built down in Lewiston. $55 million is what the cost was back then, and we were doing more work. Right now, if we were going to do a high school at that square footage,
million.
we're at 100 million. That's what construction is. So it was forward thinking and the community wasn't ready for it. And I don't think that surprised some of us. But just so you know, when the group did that, it wasn't like we had blinders on. We did talk about those things in sort of way, man, is this the right time and things like that.
I think a hard problem is you look at a building and what is it, you know, and so people think it costs that much to build a building. And I get that there's a lot more to it, especially today, because there's the technology end of it, right?
And all
But
the safety.
even like, yeah, and then when I, you know, probably went to school, we didn't change textbooks every year. It stayed the same. History stayed the same, you know, year after year, so we could use the same textbooks.
But we haven't got a new textbook for history.
No, I'm just saying in
time.
general,
Yeah.
just, you know, you think about $100 million or 50 million when a lot of these people probably, you know, paid what, 20 or 50,000 for the home they live in, you know, and it's just really, really hard to have that, to think that it costs that much for a building, you know what I mean?
What is
That's
the total
hard part.
population of the school district?
We're about 4,700. Oh, as far as
Not
population?
students, total population.
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Oh, at the school
if you know.
district, I do not know, because we encompass Rathdrum, Hauser, Bayview.
Probably around 15,000 or
Apple,
so.
Spirit Lake.
Oh, it's more.
Should be higher than 15,000, I think
so.
it's around.
It's more.
Rathdrum's 10,200.
10 to
Yeah.
Officially
West Spirit Lake.
10,200.
The zip code of Athol is about 12, 13,000.
Is it really? No, well, okay.
So
How much
around
in Athol?
25.
15,000?
About
Where-
12 or 13.
That's bigger than I thought.
In Athol?
The zip
The
code.
zip
We own
code,
30
which
acres
So
right
that
next to
includes
K-Tech,
Bayview and-
Lancaster. and
Well,
Hunter.
it comes up to
Baby's the
so-
second.
But that's
And,
more than I
um,
thought.
So,
And then you got Spirit Lake.
I get it that those in the Rathdrum area and so forth would be benefiting from that, the new school, new high school. But then again, you know, I could see folks in my area of Athol going, oh, screw it, you know, heck with this. You know, I'm not gonna go ahead and support a
Rathdrum.
levy.
That's why,
You know,
that's
to-
why
so
we had
that's,
we had Timberlake Auditorium, adding on to Timberlake Middle School.
And the Rathdrum community did support Timberlake when we built the high school up there.
right.
You know, I mean, that
But
happens.
I can just,
Yeah, there has to be
There-
some,
there- I
everybody's
can-
gotta win.
yeah.
there's gotta be a win-win here
Yep.
someplace, and I'm just
And-
looking at just from, you know, hear me out, you know, I support it, but I'm just looking at reality of how people are going to react, and, you know, I'm in, you know, in Athlone, you know, it's the county area, but I'm looking at my neighbors who are all retired, who don't have kids and so forth. I mean, I'm in a unique position, I'm 65 years old, and I got 14-year-old twins, so yeah, I'm looking at my kids in my school, and I'm looking at the future, but I'm also being realistic, they're going, oh, hell no, pardon the expression, because they are set in their ways, and they're looking at their retirement income going, this, and this, and that's gonna be a big hit.
Well, luckily, we don't have to make any decisions about a bond.
Yeah.
Right now, we just have to figure out what we're doing with the supplemental levy, but we do wanna keep what you said in the back of our minds, because what we don't wanna do is tax our people out of their homes, so we need to be cognizant of that.
That's why, and I appreciate you saying as far as being transparent. And basically it puts the onus on the school, and as far as, you know, how it progresses and the district progresses, back on the public. So they've got no one else to complain to, they can't complain to the board, they can't complain to anybody else if they vote down a measure. Obviously we want them to pass the measures and so forth, and pass the levies, but it puts it back onto the public.
Yeah, one of the things that I said in the Apple podcast, the Apple Baptist podcast, that resonated with the pastors there was that regardless of whether you have kids in our public schools, Lakeland serves all of these communities, and our
It does.
schools do a really good job of educating our kids, and we have a very high graduation rate. And when kids graduate, they go off, they learn a trade, they go to college, they become productive citizens. Kids who drop out of school stay in their community, they don't go anywhere. And when you have a high level of dropout, you start to see higher levels of crime, and you know that because you're in former law enforcement. So that resonates with people who don't have kids in the system right now. It does matter to them that we have strong schools. And so this is just part of what it costs for us to keep doing what we're doing.
Helps their property value too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, people want to move here because of the school district.
Oh, yeah.
Are the brochures still, I haven't looked at a real estate brochure for a long time. We moved here, every house in Lakeland, first thing it said Lakeland School District. Are they still like that?
Yep, and they're doing it erroneously, so people who are buying in Priest River School District think they're buying in Lakeland.
That's
and then they're
Bradbury's.
really angry when they find out they don't get to come here.
Oh.
And who are they mad at? Not the realtor. They're mad at the school district.
That's bizarre.
If you combine them, you had said earlier that you weren't as enthusiastic to do that because you thought people wouldn't, thought you might be trying to hide something, but in the description, wouldn't you just, because if you say to me plant levy, I don't know what you're talking about, but if you add in the description that it's for the maintenance and repairs or something along with supplemental, salaries and everything, wouldn't that be transparent enough? Or can
It's an
you do
omnibus
that?
spending bill.
It could be. The other thing that I think about when you talk about that one is, like right now we're at 9.52 million. And when you get over 10 million, that just seems like a bigger number to me.
Well, now that you guys said 70 million, I'm thinking, 10 is nothing.
Right, but the 70 million was like a mortgage payment that you paid over 20 years instead of, this would be $10 million every year for 2 years.
Yeah, that's
Aren't
true.
there
It's a little bit
requirements as far as what you can say in the description on a ballot?
The ballot language.
Yeah, then that's changed a little bit, and we work with, an attorney who specializes in that to make sure it's legal. And there are some limits to how many, how big it can be and things like that. So, yeah, there are some limitations, but you have some latitude on how you describe it.
So again, I'm only one voice. Somebody asked what my opinion was, and my opinion doesn't count any more than anybody else's on this team. So we have 50 minutes until we are done for tonight. So let's get up and stretch our legs, and what I would like is for you to each make it kind of to all four boards, take a look at what other people have written, and then add your thoughts, and then we'll come back. So if we could maybe take the next 20 minutes for you to be able to touch each board, think through what you think the pros and the cons are, and then at 7 we'll come back together and start to kind of look at each one and see if we can't get to the point where we kind of know what we want to recommend.
So just individually go to each of us.
And there are lots of markers around the room, so this would be a good time to use the restroom if you need
Okay,
to.
so I was originally in that court right there. I think Formie kind of sort of.
Thank you.
Why was the 7 million structured?
As a bond?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I'm thinking maybe, like Brian said, there's still some money to do some of that facility.
It would have gone out to.
Maybe we don't need to go up to the 1.3.
We could either done a negotiated
Maybe we
sale
do it for
like,
450,000.
Probably would have been
Keep that number under 10 million.
Or you could have gone out
50,000.
And
the thing is, I kind of saved that we could probably
pass the bond.
Say that again?
I worked with Portland Schools in Central
I think it was.
Yeah, I know.
We passed about a $35 million bond just before I left. And we did a negotiated sale.
15, 20 hours a week.
Yeah, I know.
And just started adding financial advisors
maintenance stuff.
This is what we're getting
Like,
now.
and put it on the open market and got effectively
They have those
bids on
Well, along with that,
you're
not
not
fighting.
that actually worked out really well. We got a course rates
When I'm thinking plant facility money,
so yeah, there's different ways to
job on Miles
to go about it. If you've got like really complex, you might negotiate.
He's talking about doing
I worked on the west side of Washington, sold bonds,
bigger,
try to keep
while your maintenance
tax rate
sort of 20, 30 years. Pretty soon you can't just paint
level.
You got to replace the whole.
which is what's going on right
We ended
now.
up capitalizing some interest and sort of.
It's not a top coat.
No,
It's a paint job. It's
you know,
on the
More
wall.
complex.
It's more than just.
We have the deal, the roof is one way, so they did get the warranty for getting those sleds and plates, all that, and I think that's what a lot of the plant
So it's worth it to pay the coupon on the ball.
had to take it all, that really do. Well, I don't know, this makes sense too. They don't think that with the two separate would hurt one.
If you could just do a levy,
Here's my fear with the
and there is a way now with
as a
plant levy where they
taxpayer,
let
not
you.
as an American taxpayer.
Think of like a
Well,
dollar
we
lease.
used to have this.
Well, you only collect as you
Come
collect.
back with
The
one.
levy I collect, if I got $2 million a year, I get
Stop that.
I get $1 million every 6 months.
Yeah,
so let's say
and then you're open about it.
here's $30 million over 10 years. I'm only getting $3 million. So obviously, if I wanted to build a $30 million building, I got to get that money up front. So there is a way to do
You did from side by side, you would basically,
but then you're still, it's sort of like a, think of like a 5-year lease with
The more you concentrate
a
on
lease purchase with a buyout at the end of it.
the more.
That's how you
right now,
structure
don't
it.
we do
So that's a possibility. The only problem is you put things on 5 years. So
you can only do
to
it
do
side by
a
side
really
probably
big
once.
building.
So you're saying if we left it that
10
way,
years, it's like it'd be too big of a hit.
And then, so now, are you gonna come back and cram a plant levy on it?
Yeah, so it just depends. I know this is tough on you. It's a little easier than
You know what?
It's not, I don't know if it's actually easier, it just feels like it's easier because it's spread over.
well, it's easier, but I know to pass a bond,
And
you
you
got
have
to
to sell it, this
66,
is one issue, we
67%
need to
have
fund the school district. This goes through the building, this goes.
So you gotta have a 2/3
staff.
supermajority to pass
We
any
don't
bond.
have widgets, we don't
So
build
that's
widgets,
brutal.
we don't have widgets.
So when we
have
passed one in Fort Lane, we had
and
71%. We would have 71%
Is
staff.
that state law?
It's in the
I did all the
Constitution, so it's not
flexibility
gonna
like
change.
Just saying if you don't do that,
So,
if you let that go on,
supplemental is 15,
the problems get too big.
Well, that's
50 plus 1, 50%.
in percent
Plant
inflation.
There's 3 different levels.
On the line, now we're thinking, we don't want that 9.7 or 9.8, now we want 12.
For a plant.
So, but you can do a supplemental levy that includes a.
Yeah, because things start falling apart.
Yeah, you could say we're gonna do supplemental on 1,000, and we'll go there. But
And now the plant,
you could do it over 10 years.
slows down.
Supplemental is 2. So that's why some people do the plant to try to get guaranteed for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
I think people would.
I think I agree with the commentary here that it's more likely to get everything passed if you put it all in one place more effort.
Yeah, and what I think
I agree with that.
and a bond don't have to be by itself.
Yeah.
It is what it is, right? If we were gonna do, we're getting a big enough tax base, we could probably do an elementary school only with the plant levy.
The high school facilities.
You might have a, you might be able to structure
You don't need
something
a
that's
contract,
55% by,
you don't need
otherwise, most districts in Idaho don't have the tax base to do some of that stuff. Boise does, Coeur d'Alene's big, we're getting pretty big. Lake Ponderay has a really good tax base. You know, some others, that's, sort of depends on your community.
Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you're
Honesty is coming to the door right now. And this feels like you're sneaking something by, and it also feels like, okay, what are you gonna have?
I'm Joe, by the way.
Because you left that door open.
I'm playing basketball.
I did basketball, now I get it.
You know?
I'm not a good runner, so you need to go.
I'm not, I'm one of these other
The biggest thing if you read it side by side is.
Are you putting the,
If you know that you're the clarification for people. Because you run them side by side. Once people get to know that this is known, I want to keep them in
This is gonna take some major communication to make sure people know exactly what they're getting.
I think they're, it's hard to swing with that. I swear,
communicate
that's a part of
that.
it. Now it's like a reality.
Yeah, both of them make sense. I don't really like making things permanent.
That's
Because then,
with inflation's not going down. Hey, it never does. We're still getting paid more for that, and that's not being with less hours. They're not going
you know, that 2006 area time we were talking about, that, I was teaching, Jason was teaching, the school district ran flat, actually, salaries were flat for 3 years, actually. The last year, I think salaries dropped a little bit, and, I mean, if this doesn't pass, it's a drastic thing, 99 people short of funding with state funding. So this has got to pass. It's got to pass.
You're going to ask for 9 from the 6. You're going to ask for, he said, basically,
Right.
really the only thing.
If there's anybody from our table,
He
he's
said you
listening
need to
to
make sure that
Graham.
you're inspected. He said that the electrical is, you need to have a certified electrician.
Yeah, you gotta have a certified electrician, they have to ask for the permit.
So you got,
The question is, who's running it?
you got things you see at the high school that if they're not taken care of the next year or
I
two.
just see it.
No, the rest of them.
Well, you guys just did a bunch of work on
Here, put some additional power in.
the press box. Is that all volunteer work?
That's all.
On the
Fine, I said, but
Net's a good, Net's electrician. No, we don't have any.
I called back and said, yeah, we're just gonna do that. I'll pull the permit. I'll pay for
You guys got the city, you go to the city?
Yeah, so electrician know how to do it, or we can ask Mike how to know. I mean, there's the money. Yeah, they say we're gonna do this, so you need the permit. It might be more special.
You're talking the bathroom building at the
High school outside.
yeah.
I'm not a teacher.
So pictures or got this. You might go to the city and say, this is the
The flooring.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Myself and Eric Singer.
That's what
But they play on the
Yeah.
Winter time?
Yeah,
I know. And so,
well, there's my fault.
that's what I'm saying.
That's our
Talking about the sidewalk behind.
So we were waiting.
Teaching department. Oh, yeah, I know. All right, let's see what we got.
Take that.
Because once you say yes to one.
Well, I'll have a make sure.
Yeah, or.
I was headed to that
Or we
one
can get,
too.
or if you got a guy, once you get the guy's name, see who it is. Send him an email back and say, hey, I just want to confirm, you don't need a permit. Could you please respond? Exactly.
Just like what happened this year, right? Right?
Absolutely.
I just paid $380 for last year.
I'm gonna make the rounds.
That's a good point.
I'm not writing anything.
No, that's a good point.
But
He'll be asking in 2 years. And he'll be alive and
yeah, fake fast. That's 41, 5-year old. So people think, well, yeah, it's pretty good.
Nobody eats one on it. One to add a little more. I'll take one.
Obviously, I won't take one.
That one. Because I haven't said them.
All right.
No, that was good.
And you live in
Football team's doing good this year. You don't watch football, wrestling?
I heard that's for you, or me? No, last game you were in a football game.
Oh, yeah, I was. Yeah, I went and saw the Seahawks beat the Broncos. But maybe they're only winning the year. So we got a good one.
I didn't get to watch the football game.
You were here?
Me and the Hackers, yeah, my wife and the Hackers, we run the community.
Got it.
So, the board members, we took that on. So, we're back with we hear the cheers, we can tell who did good. And then we heard the big one go, and then we heard towards the end, 2 cheers for Coach Hall when their names are coming up.
Right.
And we're like, oh, that ain't good.
That's not good.
Yeah. And then we'd peek around and look, and we get over 300 cameras. Wow. Got another record. $5 grand.
That's awesome.
And then we changed it this year where because the concession stand actually has events and activity and so just for you, the chief goes and says, you guys got all this money, I'm just trying to buy golf bags, and I don't have except for tickets, money comes from people buying them in. So we made a decision, talking to the rest of the board, let's get half of it right off the top. Told my age this year, that way he can get golf bags. He's not having but he just couldn't run it. I know, I got probably about a 26 cents cost, the bag and the shipping, and we sell for $4. We have a line on it.
Yes, and that's you're new here. Really, that's awesome. That's cool. There you go. See, that's once in a while when I feel like, okay, after the race, I wake up out of my phone, helps too with your Jimmy and where are you at
It's a bunch of 10 acre lots. You know when you're on Flagstone, there's like this big wooden arch. If you look at that arch,
Get excited. They're becoming really good.
Yes,
They're doing a good
I
job.
have a 2-month-old or a 2-year-old, a 6-month-old, and then I have actually a 12-year-old. But she lives in Washington, so she gets special kids and stuff like that. But that was exactly, I mean, I grew up in Apple, and that was kind of one of the things, because we had a lot of wood supply, but there was nobody in the neighborhood. There was no boys in the neighborhood, you know. You had to get dropped off somewhere at a house on Riley Loop, you know.
I've got
At the library.
Yeah, my kids are homeschooled. One neighbor teaches at Apple. Another neighbor at our school. Another neighbor's got 2 kids. but most are either retired cops.
It's a good neighborhood to be in.
One Doppler, one rocket scientist, and legitimate rocket scientist.
Where do you work?
There's a contractor, over in, well, things in Florida. And, another is
They almost want
he raises. You got some good people like grapes. We do. Now he's out here. No,
They come back.
he's got his, $1 million.
He's a recycler. 60%. They could reconsider their decision at the next meeting. Relative to how they set it back behind. But short of that,
For us,
years ago, they can ask.
$1 million would be a way long.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You don't want it?
What you need to say.
We're just middle class.
And if it's
You can
unique
fool
yourselves,
yourselves.
no, they
Well,
go.
that's the thing is, I mean, I live in town, how many times I've seen it, and everything's in a 3 or 4 bedroom house.
And by the way, they never use the drainage complex.
They want work construction.
Yeah.
Easier combined as
Something in almost 50%.
So remember you're on the east side.
Why they do, this girl here east.
Anybody living in that same street. Put a renter in there, I'm expecting to get a letter. And, you know, if you miss one of those,
The west entrance, the east entrance.
Oh, you're on the loop. It's the homeowner. It's a nice place to live.
That's the state. So we're up. But they don't.
The fire department.
Or even, the city council could look at it as well. I worked for the city of Montclair back in
An intern for the last.
and we did a utility user staff. And
He was like right with me.
our police department used to be the original hall, and it was actually an old vault. And we ended up building a stereo out of our names and not on that. And it was $1 million. We built a 2-story building.
Well, I don't actually know. Where did you graduate?
However, what she reads, part of the expression,
You have to accept what I'm saying.
you know why? Because we farmed it out and we rented it out to neighboring facilities, neighboring cities, to go ahead and use our water. And we charged them, you know, I'm gonna come in and cost you. Hey, we had it, and we also built it as our emergency operation. Our department is a very small department to over 100 personnel. Okay, so I mean, that's, but that's, you know, that is considered a small city. So, and it was like
All the growth that
less than one, like less than one
Not too good.
I won't tell your wife.
like 1 cent per unit of electricity.
Can I bring her a pie?
It's a utility user tax.
We gotta go stock the boosting club concessions tomorrow after I get
I'll have to research it when I get home. Because I know the solution
Remind me of my
for
grandma.
for fire departments, police departments.
My husband's favorite, but I've been making the chocolate cream pie for a long time, and he also likes banana cream pie, so appreciate that. And
we did
he said to me
a,
one day, you know, it would be really cool. So I do a layer of.
you know, in California, you can also have
and then I
separate
do
sales
a layer
tax.
of
So we put a sales tax on gasoline and fuel.
toffee candy bar.
Because everyone comes into the city, everyone buys gas. So, like,
Yeah, we actually probably wouldn't do that, because especially the gas station, everybody's super run.
Oh, yeah.
Summertime,
No, it's
heavy with
yeah,
cream.
it is.
And a cream cheese.
so you know, you put a sales tax of less than, less than, you know, less than 1%,
Jennifer made raspberry.
0.5% or whatever. And you can get raspberry out of that.
Pushes.
Okay, I'll have to
If
look
it's
at
not a
that,
heavy
because I know there's
cream
gotta be a
cheese.
way, without really impacting, because it'd be great to really pass it on to those that are creating the growth. But you can't 100% pass it on to them, so it's the least amount of impact for the local.
Of course, no, I
But
can't.
something like that would be huge, because it's not gonna impact me much, because I actually hardly ever get gas, because this is like the farthest I come.
Yeah, no, I mean,
So, yeah.
but okay, but everyone who's coming to cream cheese, you know, you get the Superman gas, you get the cheese on the store, all of that.
They don't have a budget.
They use our taxes for the next year. You know, they use our fire services, they use our police services.
Hey team, yeah, I have to research that. 7 o'clock, so if we can come back all together.
I wanted another one of those, but I couldn't eat a whole one, and I couldn't find a knife.
That wasn't gonna happen.
Are so good.
But I kept smelling
Thank you,
it.
Bear Holmes, for joining us, and Mark, thank you.
Are you enjoying it?
Yeah.
Is it as good tasting as it smells?
They're really good. I hear something.
They are so good.
We're back there.
Something like this.
They are so good.
It's just like,
Okay, you guys, can we go just, around our boards and take a look at the pros and the cons, and then after we've kind of discussed these, I'm gonna ask you at your table groups to do what we did last time and talk about what would your recommendation be tonight after all the discussion that we've had. So brainstorm A, which is supplemental only, looks like the ability to use it for multiple purposes. Community can have some input on how it's used. We have to pay staff, update textbooks and technology. Safety is a big deal for our community, so that would be something that we can support with that. And then the 50% plus 1 threshold for passing, and the cons is pretty consistently, we still need the plant facility levy. And then it's just 2 years, but we can't get away from the just 2 years, unfortunately, unless we do the permanent. So then brainstorm B, so is there anything anybody wants to add to that, I guess, before we leave? Supplemental only, is there somebody who just is really convinced that that's the best way to go and we need to have a conversation about it? Okay. Brainstorm B, which is to combine the two. So the pros is we're just asking, there's just one ballot measure, maybe less confusion. We still only need the 50% plus 1 to pass. It's a big ask because we're moving closer to $12 million. Maybe people think about hidden money. And then the maintenance is tied to only a 2 year, so short term as far as facility goes, and we'll be back asking again in 2 years. So anything about Plan B that you want to talk about?
Can I ask Brian a question? So you said that there is some money right now that the district has that they can do some of these minor fix-ups with.
We've been through a variety of reasons during the last couple years. We've been able to grow our fund balance in the general fund. Combination of some changes they did at the state level during COVID helped us out. Also, there's been some federal COVID dollars that we've been able to use some of those dollars for eligible expenses, and then so it reduced spending in other areas. So the board, when I built the budget this year, asked me to build a budget where we would take anything above a fund balance of 16.67%, so that's 2 months of fund balance, and that we would set that aside for plant facility projects. We're going to see what that dollar amount is when our audit's getting close to finishing up. So the board is going to set aside some dollars to do that, to help sort of the next few years, and definitely that's going to be helpful. The challenge is for the long term. Some of those unique situations that allowed us to build that fund balance like we were will not last. I can tell you that. And so it's really, you got to consider that one-time money, which is great, but one-time money is one-time money, and when you have levies or some of those sources that are ongoing, it continues the program.
But I think what you're maybe thinking about is do we have enough of a bridge to get us maybe to next year running the plant?
Right, can we do some things? Can we do some things now where we don't get into deep maintenance because of failure? In other words, we have got enough for cosmetic and you've got money for things, so to speak, but not big stuff. There we go.
Well, we didn't have money for big stuff before.
Right.
Really big stuff. So yes, if there came a boiler went out, we definitely could have the dollars to go replace it, and we wouldn't be like wondering where we're going to come up with the dollars.
Yeah, one of the other things though to keep in the back of your mind that, and I know this is near and dear to Trustee Bain's heart, is when the board had the conversation with Brian about keeping our fund balance at 16.67% of our general fund operating budget, and moving those other dollars to a different fund for capital projects. It's really important to Trustee Bain that we not use all of those dollars for capital projects, because what she would really like to do is for us to be able to kind of start a little savings account where we've sold some land, and that's sitting in a fund where we can build that up a little bit, so when we do have to go to the patrons for a bond for a new elementary school that maybe is $15 million, but we have $5 million that we've been able to save, we only now have to ask the community for a $10 million bond, because we've done our due diligence and tried to save as much as we could to help offset that.
That makes sense.
So while there might be $2.9 million moved, I think the board would rather not spend the whole $2.9 million on capital projects, so that we can set aside some money for that savings account, basically. So there is that part that they're trying to be really intentional about. Is that an accurate?
Mm-hmm. To go along that line, so for the plant maintenance, and you're asking for 1.1 something for whatever, but with the thought of new construction going in the future, right, and it being so expensive, can you ask, not this time, but can you ask for more each time and do what you're talking about? Take $1 million every time you pass something and put it into a savings for a future building.
I could bite you in the butt.
Or is there a time limit to spend that, or is
There's
there, all kinds of...
Generally, I would say when you pass levies, the expectation is those people who are paying the levy that year, those dollars are going to go support the kids in the program that year.
Okay.
So, certainly you might have some where it doesn't all get spent maybe in year one, because there's timing that happens, or if it's over 5 years. But yeah, you sort of want to, I think, go with your revenues for those type of things as general practice. For bonds, it is, once you pass a bond, part of it is that you will have the majority of your projects done within 3 years. And of course a bond is borrowing up front, and then you collect taxes generally over about 20 years to pay back your mortgage. And then Vic?
So we've kind of done the same thing with City Hall. So our carryover, we're clumping into what used to just be a pot, but we found that earmarking that for a future City Hall, so it has one use, has taken away this thing, oh, you got a slush fund sitting here. So I recommend if you haven't earmarked that money, earmark it and say, hey, this is for a capital improvement of the schools or a new building, so that when questioned, and you will be, you have a, hey, what we're doing is saving money, so we don't have to bond the whole allotment.
Okay, so brainstorm C is running the two side by side, and I guess we didn't even put your option, which I guess could be brainstorm A, where you run the supplemental this year and plant facility next year. That's what you're thinking. So running the two side by side. So pros, we get what we're gonna need. There's more options for both. Able to maintain current buildings. Patrons have options for their comfort level. Plant facility funds can only be used for capital expenses. Save to take care of buildings, and then high district accountability. And the cons, potential lack of education by voters. We would definitely have to work on that. Some confusion about why there are two measures on the ballot, and then the fear that voters will just pick one. And the plant facility levy does require 55% to pass it.
But the supplemental would still be 50 plus 1.
Correct.
At the same time, so
Correct.
that doesn't necessarily change.
Right.
If I'm allowed, I really like this because I see a lot of things when things don't pass and you have to scale it back. And so if you scaled it back to, okay, we'll run the plant facility the next year, which seems to be pretty popular, that would be a good way to scale things back, but not really reduce the whole total package.
Right.
It would remain the same amount, just spread out over 2 years.
Yeah, as long as the one that we absolutely need to pass passes.
But that's going to be your sell regardless of plans.
Yeah, somebody asked me, what happens to the district if the the supplemental doesn't pass? And I said, we basically cut $9.5 million worth of people.
I think that would be really,
a lot of people.
if you can do something like in your chart, say, if we don't get this, this is how many people will be cut from our security, from our teachers, from, because, so I think that would be helpful to actually tie it into human beings that are gonna lose their jobs without it, you know what I mean?
And I think it would be helpful if it was 99 of X number.
Yeah,
So if 99 represent, well, that's half our staff.
Right.
Well, that's a pretty big eye opener.
Yeah, right.
Where
Exactly.
99 might go, I don't know how many they have, maybe that's nothing.
Yeah, exactly like she's saying, to take that one step further, and how much is that per person? And honestly, that's not very much money per person anyways, even if it does pass, you know?
Yeah.
I had a thought on the cons. Do you think, like, if you ran them both and they looked, and then this one needed 51% and this one needed 55%, they said, I'll do this one because we'll get the percentage. Do you think the percentage will confuse people as well?
That won't be on the ballot.
They don't know.
They don't know.
Yeah.
It's really going to come down to how well Lynn and I communicate with our patrons, because we've proven that it can happen. It can happen at a high rate of passage if people understand what we're trying to accomplish. That one seems very transparent to me as far as what our needs are and what the ask is. But again, I'm just one person. So, permanent levy, pros, not a reoccurring issue, clear, consistent, easy to understand, less uncertainty as far as budgeting goes. I'm guessing that's what that is about. Cons, not enough money to do what needs to be done. It's not accounting for inflation. It's a fixed rate. There's less accountability. Current macro environment not favorable. And then how is it really working for districts to have this? Well, I can tell you that Dr. Meyer, when she went to Sandpoint, was already talking about having to run another levy, and they just got their permanent levy because she doesn't have the money to do what she wants to do up there. So it does. I don't know how you go in front of a community after getting them to agree to the permanent levy and saying, thank you so much for the 9.5 million that you've committed to giving us in perpetuity, but now we would like another 2.
Yeah, the fact that you can't increase it or change it, that really, to me, is a downside.
Yeah. So, at your tables, now looking at all the pros and cons and having some of you were having conversations as you were doing it, talk about what your table groups would recommend. If you were recommending to the board tonight, what would your recommendation be? And then we'll kind of hear and we'll see if we're a little bit closer tonight than we were last time. So,
Table group. I think the key is getting the supplemental levy passed. That's the key. So anything you're going to do that's going to damage the chances of that, I think, are something you have to look at. So that makes this one a little bit desirable. But I like, we have good support in Lakeland. We should be able to do this. What do you say?
Not as much as we used to.
Not as much as we used to, but if with the transparency and with, we should be able to pull that off.
My gut level is telling me that
It's much clearer when
There
it's
is so much
explained.
suspicion.
put it, run them side by side. Let the public and the patrons and our citizens vote how they feel. However, the emphasis that you state as far as the supplemental requires education. So, if we educate and publicize it, plain and simple, you don't pass the supplemental bill, we lose 99 people. These are your community members, these are your folks that are in your community that raise your kids and take your, and okay, we don't go ahead and deal with the plan, then we've got crappy facilities. I mean, forgive me, I'm old school, I'm, prodigy, but people, I think, if you approach them honestly and sincerely and black and white, simple, stupid, this is it. This is why we're asking this. And for you, who are a retiree, and you come up here and you don't have kids, guess what? People look at your home because, later on you are going to die or whatever. They just saw your home. So if, they want good schools and so forth. Again, it's education. That's my own opinion. And
I think the hardest part with that is getting that word out. And that is the hardest part. Because even in our little town of Apple, I have gone door to door trying to get people motivated to do something. And I'm lucky if I get, 8%, and that's my point.
You are 100% correct. You can't stick all of the education onto Lisa and the board.
Right.
Okay, it's going to be up to us as neighbors and so forth. And you may piss off your neighbor, so be it. But at least you're getting it out there, and at least getting either letters to the editor, other things to go ahead and educate people.
Which district is real good about a lot of Lakeland people write to the, during this time, Coeur d'Alene Press is usually full of letters to the editor, and they're almost always positive.
So our group came up with that one the last time, and so I was really
leaning
toward that one because of the same reason. It's like, okay, we don't want to throw a lot at anybody nowadays with the economy the way it is. But she had just told us that the plant could be up to 10 years, right?
Right.
And so I actually do kind of like this one, just because got to have more faith in people that they understand the difference between what the plant levy is for the maintenance of the schools, and the other one is for teachers and for the texts, the materials and everything. And so if people really understand there is a real difference between these two, then they can choose. And I don't know if they talked about a timeline for the plant levy if we do them side by side, but it'd be great to have it for 10 years if you could.
Doesn't the district choose? They can go anywhere from
1 to 10.
1 to 10.
1 to
Because
10
then
what?
you would only have a
years.
For a
supplemental.
plant levy, yeah, it's up to 1 to
So this
10.
is the first year that.
And the way you would educate.
But it can't change, huh? You cannot peg it to inflation. Or
No, so like Coeur d'Alene schools just try, you could say year 1 we want this, year 2 we want, you could do
Oh,
it
you
that
could
way.
do it.
You could
I
predict inflation.
think you can do that, I'd have to check, but no, usually they don't. Like Coeur d'Alene schools, they just failed one, it was very close, it was like 52%, and they didn't get the 55. They went, at their level, they went for $8 million a year for 10 years, so an $80 million, but it's 8, and it just failed, that was in August. So it was very close, but they didn't make it, but that was.
What does it break down to the average household as far as dollar amount?
That's why I asked what the population of the district is.
My
Well,
sister-in-law's a CPA.
you know, it depends, I can give you,
Just a ballpark.
so,
Like 300 per
Yeah, she's a
person.
CPA for like 20 years.
So our,
But it's just less stressful. Or I don't know, is it?
so if you look at, our,
Oh, I don't know if I can.
5 o'clock.
our current, you know, levy is gonna be like a $1.26 per assessed, per thousand.
People's taxes.
Per dollar of house value?
No, so for every $1,000,
Of house value?
yeah, $1.26 per thousand. So,
We go down.
That's
Per person, it's like 400.
That's
Like 400?
yeah, I mean,
Yes.
the average tax bill for the
That's for
district
average
is probably
supplemental,
around
whatever.
$700. $600. The last 2 years, it's gonna go down this year because we're collecting less money. So,
Property values went way up.
yeah, so the rate really dropped, but your value went up, so now the multiplier went up, right? So
But it is a hard one.
Comes out wash.
Because we all probably just got increases in our property tax and increases in your homeowner.
And I showed, I showed like a house of the last 5 years of tax bills, it was my house. And it showed that as my house value was going up, the rate was going down, and the amount I paid was very similar every year, and actually went down a little bit because the rate slightly, but it was almost a push. And that's, this year, that's definitely gonna go down because we're collecting less money. The previous years, we were collecting roughly the same amount of it.
That's where the education comes in and show people.
You can show that and do some examples, and everybody's circumstance can be a little different depending. I think, I think I agree with a lot with what people said, that they like going out with both. An advantage of doing it both is that if they both pass, you don't have to go out the next year.
Yep.
It's nice to give people a break. Everybody always asks me, why do you guys, it's like every other year you go out. Well, it's because it's every other year by law, right, for the supplemental. So that would be nice. But if one did fail, you could go out the next year and try to re-up it. Or let's say the plant didn't make it, you could try to just run the plant the next year.
We could run it, are we running these early enough? Or we could run whatever fails before the next year?
It's up, obviously to the board when to run it. You have really 4 elections you can do. One is the general in November. We're not going to make that by timing.
And that would be a really,
not a good time to do
that would not be a good time to do it.
And the next one is March. There's a May election that you're able to hit. And the last one that you could do would be, there's an August election, like Coeur d'Alene just tried their plant.
August probably makes sense from what demographics are actually in the area.
And actually, it ends up being that they, historically, the March election has been the most successful for school districts. Historically, for whatever reason.
Elementary still the same old elementary.
But you do have.
What you're going to do is, in your March election, folks are coming up on the end of the year going, okay, this is what worked well for this year for my kid in school, and my kids are ready, looking forward to next year. How can we fund it? So that's the mindset.
Yeah, I got the kids in school, so at least for the
It's still on their
school families,
mind.
they're thinking.
It's past holidays,
But
it's.
to be honest, the residents.
Yeah, March sounds like a good one.
It's just, are like, they're ready for a new high
So
school.
we're kind of, I'm kind of straight over this direction.
Yeah, I feel like we're coalescing on
There. What, you're thinking the same?
Like that one.
You just don't know unless you ask, right?
We can
You
run
don't know unless you try.
Okay, team, can we, it's 7:25, 7:26, and,
As long
the
as
goal
they're
is
worded
to
well.
start and end on time, so we have 4 minutes. So can we start with this table? If you were gonna recommend to the board tonight, what would your recommendation be? C?
I think we all agreed C.
Okay. How about this table?
We also agreed C.
C? I get when this works. How about this table?
Same.
Such a good process.
That'll never happen again.
Now you pray that when you put it on the ballot, you get the same
Positive
result.
that, no.
It was because you served pie.
Yeah.
It was
She
the
made
sandwiches.
everybody pie
Oh,
and
the
she made
sandwiches.
whipped cream. I know I ran over tonight after my last meeting.
I could tell it was homemade whipped cream.
Yeah, it tastes good.
Remind me of my
Okay,
grandma's.
so, one last question that we have not talked about, and we can talk about this in October. So, I guess, just to have in the back of your mind, this is our plan, that this is where we're gonna go. What we need to agree on next is the dollar. Are we just sticking with the same, what we've run in the past? So we do need to have a conversation about that. That'll be at our next regularly scheduled meeting. The good news is we should only need to have 1 meeting in October instead of 2, because we got to, this was the hardest part, was getting this dialed in. And I think our next regularly scheduled meeting is October 10th, if I remember correctly. Lori's nodding yes. No.
No, I'm back.
We
I'm
didn't
back.
put it in.
We haven't decided if we were gonna.
So, so our next, because we talked about meeting the second Monday of the month, so the next regularly scheduled meeting would be the 10th of October. Everybody okay with that?
I'm gonna be out of town, but that doesn't mean that,
Well, we will miss you.
We'll come to you wherever you are.
The 10th?
Okay.
At 5:30?
5:30 to 7:30.
I'll send out the invite.
Thank you, Rebecca.
What date?
I
October
could be
10th.
just a few minutes late,
Okay.
but otherwise. Braces appointment, not for me. For myself.
Thank you,
All
everybody.
right,
This
yes,
was amazing.
thank you for all of the conversation and
Is-
the work.
Wait.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
October 10th, is that Indigenous Peoples' Day?
Yes, probably. Are you closed?
City's closed.
No. Are you?
I'm available, I'm just wondering if you're open.
We're open. Yeah, we're open.
I think it's Yom Kippur too, isn't it?
Columbus Day.
I know it's Columbus Day, but no, Yom Kippur too, I think.
I think that's this month.
No, it's always in October. All right. Because I had a guy I worked with who was not the most devout of the Jewish faith, but when he got to get out of work that day, he became very devout.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yom Kippur is okay. I knew it was in his name.
Exactly. You don't want to.
That was just a test to see what faith we were, wasn't
That's right.
it? Some shock.
hey, good luck with your next city council meeting or whatever.
Yes, that would be.
Kramer Apple.
I'd almost rather have the
Pretty good news for you.
Just take your blood pressure cuff with you. Guys, his blood pressure is a little high.
Thanks for coming.
It actually is to the point of
Thank you for coming. Yeah.
Thank you for dinner.
Yeah, Leon wasn't here tonight.
No, he,
Wow.
last time they started feeling bad, so.
Is what?
Started feeling bad.
Oh, and then you threw stuff everywhere. I'm taking that.
All right, thank you. Well, we're gonna be in southern Idaho.
I ate mine.
Coming back maybe on the 9th, so.